Great. Hi, everyone. You can hear us all right? Great. Welcome. Very excited to have you here. As many of you know, a lot of resources for farm animals traditionally have gone toward work in Europe, North America, and the global north generally. And so I'm really excited to be introducing Carolina Galvani, whose group Sinergia Animal is exclusively focused on work in the global south. 2017, they started work in Brazil, quickly spread across Latin America, and then just 2 years later, expanded across to Southeast Asia. Their work is primarily focused on corporate cage-free campaigns. They also do work on institutional meat reduction, vegan advocacy, pig welfare, and a couple of other issues. Two quick reminders. One is that if you have questions, and I hope you do, put them into the Swap Card app, and we'll be asking those questions in a moment. We've got lots of time for questions, so please ask lots of them. And then secondly, Carolina will be doing office hours next door. I think it's Junior Ballroom 4 after this talk. So if you have additional questions or just want to spend time one-on-one, encourage you to go over there. Without further ado, very excited to introduce Carolina.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me well? Good. Thanks for coming. So 16 years ago, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I volunteered for an undercover investigation in Portugal. At the time, I was a Brazilian journalist living in London, and I was mostly interested in investigative work and other social issues. Like many people who come from Global South countries, I knew nothing about factory farming. There are many things I'll never forget about this first experience with factory farms, and one of them is surely the first cage egg farm I visited. We entered an immense dark shed, and for me that was very remarkable because I started hearing more and more birds chirping, and it sounded like they were sad. And as we got closer, as usual, they were trying to move around but had very little space, and many of them had lost most of their feathers as they had been starved for many days. I grew up in the countryside in Brazil, and I only saw chickens in green fields. So seeing those birds created in me a very strong desire to free them from cages, and this is a desire I still carry with me. As you may be guessing, these are the animals I will be talking about today, not because only they became very important for me, but also because running cage-free campaigns is the main focus of many animal protection organizations working in the Global South today. I'm happy to say that I will be presenting exciting progress about helping farmed animals in the Global South. But before I do that, let me talk briefly about why we need to invest our resources in the Global South. The first reason is the sheer number of animals. When it comes to the egg industry, we have about 3/4 of all hens being farmed in the Global South. We are talking about 3.8 billion sentient beings living in cramped, conventional battery cages, most of them. At this point, you may be thinking, well, that's because of China. Indeed, China alone farms over 1.2 billion hens, or about 1/3 of all hens farmed in the Global South. But even when we remove China from the equation, other Global South countries farm around 49% of all hens in the world. Another comparison I like to make concerns Indonesia. Indonesia alone farms almost the equivalent of 3/4 of egg production done in 21 in all the 20. Sorry, it's about 3/4 of all egg production in EU member countries, including the Netherlands and Spain, which are major producers. And my last comparison in terms of numbers, if we look only at the 9 countries where Sinergia Animal works in the Global South, which are Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Indonesia, Peru, Thailand, and Uruguay, we are talking about 580 million hens, or 11% of the world's production. Simply put, that's more than one hen in every 10 exploited by the egg industry globally. And the Global South will become even more important in our efforts to help farmed animals. Factory farming is growing very rapidly in these countries as middle classes emerge and income levels increase. Again, let me use Indonesia as an example. As we can see on this graph, egg production in Indonesia has increased almost fivefold in 5 years. And within this period, Indonesia has jumped from the 8th to the 4th position on the international ranking of top egg producers. But it's not only about Indonesia. In the next 7 years, around 77% of the projected growth in egg production will occur in developing countries. Asian countries like India, Pakistan, and Indonesia are the ones that will grow egg production the most, followed by Latin American countries like Brazil and Mexico. The second aspect of why we should be working in the Global South is about how these animals are raised. As we can see here on this map, we have more than 2/3 of all laying hens in the world in the Global South, yet 2/3 of cage-free production is in the Global North. So we can see here that the proportion is quite inverted. And if we are talking about reducing animal suffering wherever they are, we need to consider the Global South. Another factor I would like to highlight is about the specific things we found during investigations in countries of the Global South. And of course, we found animals in cages in these countries, but we also find other very sad and shocking things that are probably because authorities and farmers in these countries have very little concern with animal welfare in general. In 2 separate investigations in Argentina, we found hens that had escaped from cages stuck in excrement. They died slowly from the lack of food and water, and hygiene conditions were, of course, very poor, and it was even hard to imagine when the sheds were cleaned for the last time. In Indonesia, our investigations uncovered hens and ducks confined in cages that are made of bamboo instead of metal. We were sad to hear from animal welfare experts that bamboo cages can cause even more harm in terms of feather loss and injuries. And this is a very sad picture, so I'll pass it. And also in Brazil and Indonesia, we found hens who had lost their sight from diseases that can easily be treated if farmers took proper care. As I mentioned in the beginning, there is hope for these animals, but challenges also exist, and I will be talking about how we are finding ways to overcome challenges to work in the Global South. The first challenge is the very low level of awareness about factory farming. So in most of the Global South, movements to protect farmed animals don't exist or are very small. And this means we are building this movement from scratch in some places or helping scale up a very small movement in countries where it already exists. And I think it's worth mentioning that in countries where the movement already exists, sometimes these movements are not at all aligned with more pragmatic approaches or EA principles, so it's not very easy as well to join forces in the beginning. This, of course, has consequences for our campaigns. So in Asia, for example, it's very hard to get people to sign our petitions and to take action. And it's also hard to convince companies they should care. And our campaigns can be long and difficult to win many times. To overcome this challenge, we are investing resources in in-depth consumer research. And we already have some insights about how we can engage agents more. And we are also adapting the way we run ads to gather petitions, petition signatures, and volunteer signups. And actually what we found out that it's not only about messaging, it's about gathering signups directly on social media platforms instead of directing people to websites. We also realized we need to invest more in community building. So this year we are going to be doing that. We are going to have staff fully dedicated to building bigger and stronger communities. And we are going to be doing this online and offline. I think the pandemic was very challenging, so everything was done online in previous years. So we are hoping that, engaging with people face-to-face will change things. A small movement without many people who are mission-aligned also translates into being difficult to find talent. In Asia, for example, we had positions open for many months and projects were delayed because of it. But luckily, we are finding solutions. So I think one of the things we did that changed things quite a bit was to create a people and operations department and have people with previous experience in recruiting. And we also are working more professionally, so we are using LinkedIn ads to find talent, and we no longer rely only on recommendations or Facebook groups. We are working with a lot of pragmatism as well. We are hiring people who had no previous concerns about farmed animal welfare. And to make this work, we are investing a lot of time and resources into educating new team members about the cause. And also, we are using a lot of resources to develop our team members and leadership to work more professionally. In some countries where we work, regulations about protesting and freedom of speech can be restrictive and challenging. So just to give one example, recently our team was forbidden to protest in a public square because we would name a specific company and ask it to go cage-free. That was considered unfair blaming. So now we are redesigning our protests to direct people to campaign petitions via QR codes and without mentioning names of companies. So what we are doing is to work very carefully with experienced lawyers who had done work for other pressure organizations in the past, like Greenpeace and Amnesty International. And this, of course, results in slower and more bureaucratic processes, as every detail of campaigns have to be reviewed. But what matters is that we are being able to use pressure safely. I don't know how familiar you are with corporate campaigns, but you usually only get wins when you use pressure. And I know this is not only an issue in Global South countries, but debates about making food more expensive and less accessible for people are surely more heated in these countries because of higher poverty levels. And as we know, cage-free eggs cost more, and this topic surely makes our negotiations with companies harder, and we are also often questioned by the media about it and other social justice movements as well. So what we are doing is to carefully train our teams to say that we are asking companies to pay the price and not transfer it to consumers. And we are also reminding our audiences that currently animals are suffering a lot to produce cheap eggs, and that's also not fair. So now, as promised, let's move on to the best part of this presentation. Let's talk about progress. So in the last 5 years, our campaigns and negotiations have helped secure over 90 cage-free commitments in 35 different countries. These commitments surely have the potential to free a great number of animals from cages, and here we have some examples. So we led efforts that resulted in global commitments from multinationals like Dunkin' Donuts and Krispy Kreme that have a good presence in Asia. In Argentina, Chile, and Indonesia, major supermarket chains like Carrefour, Cencosud, and Super Indo have made commitments. Not all of them are perfect yet. We're working on it. And in countries like Colombia and Thailand, we already have 2 major retailers committed. We have also been pleasantly surprised by how Asian governments are reacting. So after some major cage-free commitments from food companies in Thailand, the Thai Department of Livestock acknowledged the trend and issued standards for cage-free production. And in Indonesia, our partner organization, Animal Friends Jogja, has engaged in regular and very promising talks with the government about the need to help farmers transition to cage-free systems. We are also deeply concerned about the implementation of these commitments. If they are not implemented, they will not bring any change to the conditions of animals. So we started tracking progress both in Latin America and Asia. And the results are both promising and concerning, I would say. So in Latin America, we have a participation rate of 40%, and in Asia, 70%. This means that we have a good number of companies engaging with our teams. However, in Latin America, only 25% of them already report concrete progress, and in Asia, even less, 16%. We will keep running these programs every year, and we hope we will be able to make these numbers grow. And we are already using pressure because we don't have a lot of time. A lot of these commitments have 2025 as a deadline. So what we are doing is to run ads engaging employees and decision makers at companies, asking them to encourage their companies to report progress. We are also monitoring what companies consider to be their main challenges. And here we see that the lack of supply, meaning that there are not enough cage-free producers, is a major concern, especially in Asia. We do expect this will get better as companies start implementing the commitments. They will kind of encourage new producers to start producing cage-free eggs. But if that doesn't happen because of market forces, I think we will also have to find ways to make it happen or to help the production of cage-free eggs grow. And now comparing the overall numbers from the movement globally, if we look at European numbers especially, we can see that there is still a long way to go for Global South countries. And the disparity in Asia, where most animals are, is very big. But I like to use Brazil as an example to bring hope. So Brazil already has over 200 cage-free policies and accounts for more than half of all policies in Latin America. And according to estimates done by Mercy for Animals, if all these commitments are implemented, 50% of egg production in Brazil will be done in cage-free systems. And this also means that almost half of all hens in Brazil will be farmed in cage-free systems, around 80 million hens. I think this situation only became possible because in Brazil we have 5 strong organizations working on this issue, and also because funding to Brazil increased significantly in recent years. And that makes me think that in countries where we can use pressure in democracies, if we have more organizations coming to do this type of work, with proper resources and a clear focus on cage-free campaigns, I think we will see similar progress in other Global South territories as well. And before I finish, I would like to share that Sinergia Animal is not the only organization working in the Global South. We have many other international and national organizations in this fight with us. So if you are interested in helping animals in the Global South, these are all great organizations to support. That's all from me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you.
So we're going to go to your questions in just a moment, and a reminder to keep the questions coming in. You can also vote on the questions that are already there, so thumbs up the ones, and I will ask the ones that get the most thumbs up. First, just wanted to ask one question of my own, which is, I'm curious, across all these countries you're operating in, which ones you found easiest to get progress in and which have been hardest, and perhaps a little bit about why you think that might be.
Yeah. So I think the easiest countries are Brazil and Colombia. And it's difficult to explain exactly why, but what we get is that companies do care when they're exposed. And in other Latin American countries, for example, Argentina is a difficult country. And it seems like when companies are exposed, they just stop the dialogue and they don't take action. So pressure doesn't work very well. And I think, of course, like Asian countries are also more challenging because of the state of the movement. And I think the state of the movement also has an influence on how companies react. If they don't think the issue really matters to society, I think it's harder for them to commit.
Oh, thank you. I saw one of the first questions we had with a lot of votes was from Maya, asking what specific social science research questions should be addressed in Global South countries to support your work?
Yeah, I think just understanding consumers' perceptions in general. I think we don't have a lot of information available yet. And I think Asia is especially challenging. We did do research with Ipsos, and we actually found out that the messaging works, but we have to work more with positive messaging. So for example, Asian consumers really want to know the benefits of cage-free systems to animals, and we usually don't talk about that so much because we don't want people to consume eggs. We don't want to increase consumption. But yeah, I think just understanding how people think in general in many of these countries would be very valuable. We have other research priorities, but I don't think they're related to social sciences. Yeah, but we can talk about it later if you're interested.
Okay, great, thanks. And for some of these longer questions, I'm going to summarize. I hope I will do a good job or a fair job to you. So Ryan asked about why do these cage-free campaigns in the first place still involve cage-free, still involve suffering? Why not just push for the abolition of the egg industry?
I think some of us have very different views on that. I think, as I said in the beginning, for me on a personal level, whenever I have visited many farms, cage and cage-free, and I can see a very clear difference. And I prefer to be pragmatic. I think at this time in history, it's very hard to get everybody to go vegan. We still have a long way to go. And I'm also very excited, we have research from the welfare, Cynthia's work, it's the welfare footprint project, that you see that cage-free systems can reduce the amount of hours, so much. I think we're talking about over 5,000 hours, right? If we get all the types of suffering together. So for me, there is enough evidence that we are doing the right thing for these animals when we reduce suffering.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and that website is welfarefootprint.org. They've been doing a major analysis of the amount of suffering involved in cage systems and cage-free systems. And so if it's a question you're curious about, I think it's the best research that is out there. Michael had a question about the Indonesian the Indonesian egg production figures. I think the graph looked a little funny. It kind of went flat, and then it went like way up, and then it went flat again. He said, "Do you know what's going on there? Was that like a data thing? Was it a whole bunch of companies moved in?" It's okay if you don't know the answer to this one.
Yeah, I was not the one. I had my research team coming up with the data. But I can check. But I think what is interesting to say, I was telling Lewis before the presentation, is that these figures, they vary a lot according to the source. And what we see is that when we get national figures, so the figures from the Indonesian government are much higher than the international figure. But I think there might be something wrong because I think it's still growing, as we said, from the FAO figures. We are gonna the expected growth rate is 20% over the next 7 years. So yeah, I'll check it out. I didn't notice.
Cool. Karthik asks about the structure of meat production in developing countries. Does it tend to be integrated into global supply chains, or is it more used for domestic consumption? And I think he's particularly interested in how impactful global companies' commitments can be, or whether this really, ultimately, we really need domestic companies' commitments.
Yeah, I would say that just talking about countries, so like Brazil and Thailand, I don't know if that's the question, but I'll cover the other end after. So Brazil and Thailand are highly integrated countries. We have like very big companies like JBS, BRF, and CP Foods in Thailand. So the production is very integrated, and they export as well. So I think pressure from abroad can also work. And what, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, no, that was and to what degree it's domestic consumption versus, or at least domestic companies, I guess, versus international companies that are consuming the eggs.
That are producing or consuming?
It's a great question. I think we'll be interested in either.
No, I think most, like in the egg industry, we mainly have national companies producing for the national market. I think the only exception is Indonesia. In Indonesia, there are Malaysian and Thai integrators producing eggs in Indonesia. But it's for the national market. I don't know if it answers the question.
Cool. No, yeah. I think that does. Thank you. So Dean said, I'm moved by this as an SF resident whose family is mostly in the Philippines. How can people in the West, especially those of us with connections to the global South, support people and work there?
Well, I think that the first thing would be to find out like the organizations that are doing good work and ask them directly how you could help them. If you asked us how you could help us, we have a community of volunteers who put an international community of volunteers who sends messages to companies and who take action online. That is available on our international website, which is sinergiaanimalinternational.org. So there are a lot of actions to take online. We also have an advisory board. So if you have like any specific skills to help our teams, to coach our teams, we welcome people as well. So I think this would be the two main ways.
Great.
To support.
And that could also be a good thing for people to see you for the hour where you'll be meeting with people again after this in Junior Ballroom 4, right?
Yes.
Cool. Question from Joseph is, what cultural adaptations you need to make to your tactics to achieve your goals across such a wide variety of countries?
Yeah, so I think Latin cultures are similar. I think they're fairly similar, so we don't see like the need of adapting things a lot in Latin America. But when it comes to Asia, I think we see like more specific needs. So for example, in Thailand, we learned that we can use pressure, but it cannot be too aggressive. Like it has, like you can call for more compassion, please help animals. If you are like too kind of activist, if you look like you're putting a lot of pressure and using a lot of confrontation, it doesn't work with Thai culture. And in Indonesia, it works. Yeah, it works very well to use confrontation. But as I said in the beginning, I think during the presentation or here, what we learned is that I think because like in the West, if you say cage-free, everybody knows what it means for animals. And in Asia, like we found out that they think animals will be free, they will be killed by predators, and many like things that are not really true. So we just found out that we need to be more transparent and explain what cage-free is to consumers.
We have a related question from Dylan asking about whether there are any notable effects from cultural differences between countries on attitude change, or whether it's all really dominated by the economics.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. I think he's asking about to what degree do the cultural differences between countries affect how effective your campaigns can be, or is it really just it all comes back down to the economic factors?
No, I think cultural differences do have a role to play. As I said before, like Argentina, for example, is a very hard country, and it's not like I'm not talking about consumers, but like the corporate culture doesn't respond to pressure. And in other countries like Brazil and Colombia, we don't know exactly why, but it works. And also the way we engage with consumers and activists, it really has to be nationalized. We have to take culture into consideration for sure. Cool.
So then an operational question is about your approach to ensuring enhancing value alignment in your people and operations. So I think this is maybe asking across such a broad international organization. Like how do you keep it working aligned internally?
Yeah, so I think that's something we realized we need to do more very recently. So we are still finding ways. The first step we are taking, we have an onboarding process. And in the beginning, like it was very technical, like telling people what they have to do, what their role is, what different departments do. But we actually found out that we have to start by telling them what our mission is, why it matters. So like I think we are going to add much more content when it comes to that. And also I think we are working with leadership alignments to make this like a permanent thing when we have meetings, when we give presentations. Yeah, we're going to make it like more, we are going to bring this type of content more regularly.
Yeah. So George asks how helpful it is to the success of these campaigns to have large local communities of vegans.
That's a good question. Actually, what happens, especially in Latin America, the vegan communities, they don't like welfare work. A lot of them. And what we learned is that a lot of our communities are formed of people. We use a lot of change.org petitions, for example. So most people who sign these petitions are people who care about cats and dogs. And when you talk to them about improving welfare, for them it makes a lot of sense. So I think we have more people who are not vegan in our communities, at least in the beginning. But of course, when they come, we give them all the good reasons to go vegan. Yeah.
We should have asked how helpful or harmful are local communities of vegans. That's often the way it is. Cheyenne asks, is there an effort to integrate local knowledge and talent to adapt your tactical strategies and theories of change to each country?
Well, we are building an international theory of change now, so I think I like the idea of having national ones. But I think it would make a lot of sense to have national theory of changes that take culture into consideration. And what we see internally as well is that like our leaders, like they're very, very passionate and they get a lot of content from international campaigns. And sometimes we even have to remind them, are you taking your culture into consideration? Because we're very eager to get results, and usually it comes with very strong messaging. So I like the suggestion of having national theory of changes, and we are working on having more like key messaging for each country.
Cool. Jose Ramon asks about the perceptions of consumers, what you think of international environmental organizations that are demanding complete end of factory farming, well, there are animal welfare groups like yours requesting intermediate measures. Can it be a problem in the Global South to be perceived as less demanding, asking for less than these environmental groups are sometimes asking for?
I would say that I think our societies are more ready to deal with our proposal than the end it completely ask. Mm-hmm. It's a very new topic, like not many people are aware. And as I said, like even our supporter base, we get a lot of people who care about cats and dogs, and for them, this is very new. So I think being more pragmatic convinces more people to join the movement, I would say. I don't know if it answers the question.
Sure, yeah. I think so. Dean asks how adversarial these campaigns normally are, and it's curious whether there's a way to more work with companies to make it easier for them to transition to cage-free.
Yeah, we are trying to look at ways to show companies these in a more positive way. So we are working with marketing experts, for example, to have a specific content for companies. And of course, when we start engaging with companies, in the beginning we made mistakes. We used pressure too quickly, but now we are a bit more careful. So we try to build a good relationship with them. Then if they don't do anything, then we tell them we are going to use pressure. I think it's a good effort to try to portray things in a more positive way and to be to talk more how they talk, to use like business language. But our experience is that pressure will always be needed, and you have to find the right way to use pressure in most cases. Does it answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah. Rocky asks, for those donating to work in countries that we're less familiar with, so particularly Global South countries, should we donate directly to local organizations, or is it better to donate through international organizations, through donor funds, or some other way?
I think for me that's a very difficult question, because I really like the idea of having more people supporting smaller and local organizations. But I also think the work done by international organizations is really important, because I think what we see is that international organizations are willing to take more risks and use more pressure. And the local organizations, because they don't have experience and also they have less resources, they're more careful. So I would do both. And I think it is great to have local and international organizations working together if it's done responsibly by the international ones. So I would support both, I would say.
Cool. Do you want to say anything more about how people can support your campaigns? You've talked about, I think you can go on the website and get involved in activism. Obviously, I imagine donations are very welcome. Yeah. Are there any other things you would emphasize about how people can help with this work themselves?
You could become a very qualified volunteer as well. Like I spoke to very clever and interesting people during the conference who could run projects for us and use a lot of expertise that we don't have. That would be another idea. So anything related to research, digital marketing, strategic planning. I mean, there are many things people could help with. So if you have like any specific skills that you think could be helpful for us, please get in touch, and we would love to bring you on board.
Cool. Yeah. And how do you find talent in these countries? What's the process for identifying talent?
Yeah. So I think I spoke a little bit about that during the presentation. In the beginning, we went and spoke to the national NGOs. And we asked them if they wanted to work for us, because most of them are run by volunteers, or if they had people to recommend. So it was mostly from recommendations. At the time, like Facebook groups were very active. They're not anymore, but it also worked to post job positions on Facebook groups of vegans or animal advocates in general. But of course, like we did that in the beginning, but when we really started growing, we couldn't get enough people by just doing this. So we started doing ads on LinkedIn. And now we are recruiting more. We don't have many more animal protection people to hire. We're more like hiring more talent and bringing them and developing them in terms of mission alignment internally. So LinkedIn ads are the main tool nowadays.
And building off that, George asks, assuming talent weren't a bottleneck for you, how much could you scale up these corporate campaigns? Specifically, he's interested if you have any sense of how much funding you think would be helpful, or how many chickens you think you could help.
No, I think if we didn't have like difficulties in finding talent, and if we didn't have to spend time and resources to help train and develop people, it would surely speed up progress quite a bit. And in terms of funding, we can take more funding. But I think what we learned is that we need to be careful. Because when you grow very fast, you can have a lot of like internal problems that you cannot anticipate. So yeah, I think you just have to be careful and do it in a responsible way.
Cool, great. Well, I think that is the full set of questions. So thank you very much for your time and for sharing such great information with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all for coming.